Good day. Welcome to Africa Pivotal Moments, a podcast where I speak with leaders of journalism, the news media, and technology industries, and the impacts of these fields on society, especially on the African media landscape. Today, I speak with Dr. Yemisi Akinbobola, the CEO and co-founder of the African Women in Media, an international NGO that seeks to improve the work and the livelihoods of African journalists. A very good morning to you, Dr. Yemisi Akinbobola, and welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Francis. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Yes, in today's edition of Africa Pivotal Moments, I'm speaking with Dr. Yemisi Akinbobola, who is the CEO and co-founder of the African Women in Media, an international NGO which seeks to improve the work and the livelihoods of African women journalists. Dr. Akinbobola is an award-winning investigative journalist from Nigeria, and she's currently a senior media and journalism academic at a UK university. Maybe if we can begin, I see that your website of the African Women in Media says the organization's main objective is to create, and I'm quoting here, an enabling environment for African media women all over the globe through the presentation and representation of women voices in the media. Could you tell us what your organization does and how it carries out its work?
Thank you so much. Such an important question. As you said, our work aims to contribute to creating enabling environments for African women working in media industries. And actually, we interpret media industries very broadly. So whilst the majority of our network are journalists, we also incorporate other media industries as well. We started initially as a Facebook group in 2016, would you believe? And for the next 3 years, so 2017 until 2020, we were an annual conference. And it was during the pandemic that we actually began to do training and capacity building projects. For example, we partnered with UNESCO to do some research into the experiences of East African women journalists during the pandemic and how that's impacted them. But we also then did a number of trainings and capacity building programs to support women during that period, whether it's in things like, how to translate scientific information into, consumable content, for example. And we also then later that year launched Our News, which is a niche news website where we report the gender angle on global issues. And so over the years, we've gone on to do a number of things. So we continue to do a number of research. We've produced a lot of kind of things like media toolkits and policy guidance, especially for organizations to develop their own internal policies. And we continue to do our annual conference. We actually have our ninth conference coming up in December this year at the African Union Commission in Addis Ababa. And that one really focuses on how do we translate gender and media policies into action. And the reason behind that thing was because in 2023, at our 7th annual conference, the community co-designed what we call the Kigali Declaration on the Elimination of Gender Violence in and through Media in Africa. And as you know, at the beginning of this year, the African Union at the AU Summit in February, adopted and ratified the AU Convention to end violence against women and girls in Africa. So there's a clear connection here between kind of policy, regional policy around ending violence against women and girls, and our Kigali Declaration that looks at this in the context of the media, both in terms of how media reports violence against women and girls, but also in addressing the kind of violence that women in media experience themselves. So that is how we've kind of arrived at this theme. And it's really an opportunity for us as a community to interface with policymakers to make sure that, our experiences as women in media are taken care of in regulations and policies, both at national, regional, micro, macro, and meso levels, as well across the continent. So that gives you a kind of a snapshot of what we do. Our community is global, and we have over 10,000 members in our community, and it continues to grow. So far, we have about 62 people and organizations that have signed the Kigali Declaration as well. And we over the next few months, we'll be doing a number of training activities to support organizations and individuals in implementing the Kigali Declaration on the elimination of gender violence in and through media in Africa.
Yes, thank you. Obviously, support from the governments, is a critical, issue. Are you getting support from African governments? Indeed, are you getting support for your initiatives from the, from the African Union?
So absolutely, the African Union has been a key partner for us since 2019, and we've collaborated on a number of initiatives, not just our conference. So, for example, we're currently working with them and GIZ on our Move Africa project. Move Africa project is about the free trade agreement, really, and celebrating the movement, migration within the continent, and telling the stories of women. From our perspective, we're telling the stories of women who are migrating within the continent, whether for economic reasons or other kind of reasons, and really highlighting the benefits of free movement within the continent. So absolutely, we're getting a lot of support. The AU are very keen to support our initiatives. They're very, very keen to engage with women in media. And as you know, they have the Agenda 2063, and part of that is Aspiration 6 that speaks to women's rights and rights of girls and those things. So absolutely at that policy level. And it's just great to see that the member states adopted the Convention to End Violence Against Women and Girls in Africa. And so the job now begins for AU member states to implement that locally and at regional blocks. We've been very fortunate to have, in each country we've been to, we've got great support of those countries in terms of the conference and those kind of things. And we've generally found it a very positive experience.
Yes, thank you. What would you say have been some of the main challenges which are facing your organization, especially African women journalists?
Okay, so I'll answer that question in two parts. Our research demonstrates a range of experiences of women in media in terms of the challenges they face, particularly women journalists. Issues that are common include things like sexual harassment, includes things like the gender pay gap, includes things like just creating environments that are gender safe as well, especially when we consider things around technology facilitated gender-based violence as an example. So if we take sexual harassment, in 2020, we did a kind of continental-wide research, and sexual harassment was like the second most discussed issue. We then further did kind of country level research as well, like for example in Rwanda. I recently completed one in Ethiopia, and you see sexual harassment repeated. So that's one common theme that repeats. And interestingly, it is not just internally in the newsroom. Within the newsroom, there are various forms of sexual harassment, from sextortion, which is where superiors use power, for example, if you're trying to get promotion, to get sexual favors. But you also have those where it is from sources, so people that you're trying to interview for your stories and those kind of things. So actually, women in media are bombarded both internally and by sources, and now through technology on social media as well. And so it's quite a epidemic in terms of the experiences of women. And gender pay gap is very interesting because often when we speak about the gender pay gap, it's usually in the context of, your male colleagues who are on the same level and more than you. And that is the case, but it's a lot more than that. There's also the consequences of not giving equal opportunities to training, for example, or equal opportunities to be able to report the kind of stories that support your career progression. So, for example, if women journalists are not encouraged or supported to report politics or business, which are seen as the core news content, it impacts the extent to which they progress in their career and get those promotion. And subsequently, there's a pay gap because there is a lack of promotion. Same thing with attending training events and conferences and those kind of things. When you have not the same equal footing as your male colleagues to attend training, again, that impacts the extent to which you can progress in your career, and subsequently there's a pay gap, which is why events like our annual conference, the African Women in Media Annual Conference, is important. We're not a women-only space, but we do prioritize the voices of women. And so when you have those kind of spaces, it means that you have more chances of attending and getting those training and skills development and building that network, because it is a women prioritizing space. So those are some of the experiences of women in media based on our research.
And how are you tackling these challenges, and how have you been successful in doing so?
Yeah, excellent question. It has to be taken at kind of different stages. There's the aspects where you're working directly with the women affected, right? In all the kind of areas, not just sexual harassment or pay gap or skills gap, all the other areas. So there is the aspect of training, of direct training for women in media, and we do that a lot. And most of our training, if not all of our training, are women-only spaces for that very specific reason, right? For the reason I explained in terms of having limited, unequal access to training. And so you have training, you have the opportunities for you to dialogue and to network and to meet other people, right? And so that happens majority through our conference. But we also have work where we're working directly with organizations, and now with policymakers, as I've explained, especially with our Kigali Declaration, right? So that work on the Kigali Declaration means that we have to work directly with media managers, with media leaders, with even HR teams, because we've got to understand that media organizations are businesses at the end of the day that have different objectives. And so the journalism is just one track, but the HR team the human resources team have a big role to play in all of this also. So that is an area of work that we're increasingly going into now, to work with media leaders, managers, and HR in terms of internal policies, but then also with unions and associations and other civil society organizations, and then at the more macro level, working with policymakers, regulators. And so that is something that we're now beginning to do, and this upcoming conference is a pivotal moment that would allow us to do that.
So are you seeing success in terms of all these initiatives?
Absolutely. Actually, we did last year, we did our monitoring and evaluation to look at the impact of our programs. And over 90% of people who have engaged in our training program said that it's had a positive impact on their career trajectory. In all of our kind of theories of change and areas we wanted to impact, we had excellent outcomes in terms of the impact it's had for them. To give you a very specific example in terms of real policy change, following the research that we did in collaboration with Foyo Media Institute in Rwanda, where we found out sexual harassment was the #1 discussed issue, we then subsequently presented the findings to a room full of media managers from across, I think, about 15 media organizations. And there was an unanimous agreement in that meeting for them to set up an anti-sexual harassment committee for media in Rwanda. And that committee, they set up a kind of interim committee. They hired a consultant to write a policy for the committee, and that policy has now been signed by, I don't know the exact figure, but quite a lot of media organizations in the country have now signed that commitment, that anti-sexual harassment policy, and the committee continues to thrive. So that's a clear example of where our research has informed practice and has led to meaningful action that is now been implemented. And I know that that model is being replicated in other countries like South Sudan, Kenya, etc., by kind of different civil society organizations like AMWIC in Kenya, for example, are doing a fantastic job. They're signatory to the Kigali Declaration and doing a lot of work with media there. So it's really important, I think, that last part, that we are not the only sole players in this field. We are kind of initiating things, and then the hope is that that is then implemented by local civil society and media organizations, and that each country, each group, each organization takes ownership of that.
So maybe the next stage would be for your organization to do a monitoring and evaluation situation to check whether in the implementation of these policies, media houses are doing what they're saying they are doing.
And that's such an important thing, because we all know in the policy worlds generally, whether it's media, whether it's conflict, women, peace and security, implementation is the big issue, isn't it? It's one thing to sign a declaration, it's quite another thing to do something with it. And so you're absolutely right. We are currently working on our strategic plan for the next 5 years, and methods of monitoring is a key fundamental part that we've already built into that. So for example, making sure that our conferences do not just remain as spaces for dialogue, but that we have working groups and those kind of things that ensures that there is an implementation, and that we're reporting back at each year, we're seeing the progress we made. And, like you said, working with partners across the continent, so that we're not just doing all of this alone or in silos, that we're a big community working towards achieving the same objective.
Yes, thank you. It's a huge task, or it's a huge challenge, the kind of programs which you are implementing, very interesting. But who funds your organization?
We have quite a number of partners. So for example, we are in a third year, we are on the third year of a 3-year project in Nigeria on media coverage of violence against women and girls, and that has been funded by the Wole Soyinka Center for Investigative Journalism and MacArthur Foundation, right? So we're also doing a 3-country project in Burkina Faso, Benin Republic, and Togo that's been funded by the African Women Development Fund. I mentioned earlier on our work in Rwanda, that's funded by For You Media Institute. So we have quite a diverse range of partners, and again, the AU, who have partnered with us on the Move Africa project with GIZ, and also on the conference, and several conferences in the past as well as our pitch zone. So we have quite a diverse range of supporters. And funding comes both monetarily, but also comes in kind. So for example, we've partnered with various airlines for our conferences where they've given discounts, so it's not always about kind of financial funding, but also in-kind funding.
Thank you. Has the cut in funding for USAID affected you in any way?
We have not had any engagement with USAID till date, so we've not been impacted directly, at least, by the current situation with USAID.
Okay. From time to time, we have seen, as you have been indicating as well, about the work of the Kigali, declaration. So specifically, besides, the committees which we have spoken about, which are tackling, gender violence and so on, working with newsrooms, what else are you doing with the Kigali Declaration?
Great question. So you made a very wonderful point earlier on about implementation, right? So we are at that stage where we're supporting organizations, individuals to implement. That is where we are right now. We recently got funding from UNESCO, the IPDC framework. And so we're about to start a training support signatories in the implementation of the Kigali Declaration. Particularly, we are looking at how we can use AI as part of that process, but then also making sure that AI is part of the things that they are looking into as part of the implementation. Does that make sense? So we're both using AI as a tool within the training, but then also highlighting the things that they need to think about when it comes to AI as they're implementing the Kigali Declaration. So that's an example of the things we're doing. And like I said, the upcoming conference is very much focused on how do we ensure that this Kigali Declaration is part of broader policy agendas, for example, the AU's Convention on for Ending Violence Against Women and Girls, right? So whilst that is not, the AU Convention is not necessarily focused on media, it is focused broadly on violence against women and girls, but actually the media plays a very critical role in that, right? And also apart from it playing a critical role, there is also a type of violence that women journalists and women in media experience that needs to be part of that conversation. So that is really an avenue through which we are making sure that we're engaging with policymakers so that within regulatory frameworks, within policy frameworks, the Kigali Declaration is kind of being incorporated at that level. That then kind of filters down to organizational level. Monitoring and evaluation has to take place at different levels. So yes, we are monitoring the impact. So for example, if you go to africanwomeninmedia.com/declaration and you sign the declaration, you'll be taken to a dashboard where you then, based on the criteria you've selected, so let's say, for example, you're signing as an organization or you're signing as a platform, there's a set minimum of standards that you have to meet as a signature of the declaration. So the dashboard allows you to itemize each of these things and create actions against them, right? So the idea is that as you're using this platform, we are seeing what you're doing, and also the world is seeing what you're doing, because on the front end, people will see where you are on your journey. So it's a full community kind of monitoring. On the policy level, again, because if, let's say, a country, for example, who has ratified the AU Convention is adopting the Kigali Declaration on regulatory level, obviously you have to report back to the AU at some point. So, so there's so many different levels of monitoring, and it's very important, I repeat again, that there's monitoring at our level, but then there's monitoring at your level and at the policy level. And that process would take a number of years to really fully implement, but we are on that journey.
And finally, just the issue of generative artificial intelligence. Are women journalists in Africa getting the necessary training, the skilling which they need in order to operate effectively and efficiently?
Yeah, another excellent and timely conversation, and actually one that we are currently doing research on. So we are actually, through support from Luminate, doing research on that right now as we speak. So I don't want to preempt the results of the research, but what we've organized is a series of focus group with women in media to listen to them and say, okay, what is your experience with AI and the adoption in newsrooms? What existing research has said, not one done by us, but academics, is that newsrooms globally, but focused on Africa, are not all newsrooms are officially adopting AI, but they're ad hoc adopting AI in the sense that individual journalists are using it randomly, but not all media organizations have kind of developed a policy around it, or some guidance around it. And that's something that really needs to happen. There's some really exciting projects that's happening. So for example, I think in Tanzania, there's an organization that created an AI news reporter. In Nigeria, you have Women FM that have it's a radio station, and they have a news reporter also, right? A female AI that kind of reports the news. All of those things are really exciting, but at the same time, there's aspects in which it feeds into some fears around AI taking jobs, and there's this aspect of stereotyping. So it is not to say that we shouldn't use AI. We absolutely should. And the more you engage with AI, the more you improve your skills of using AI. But there needs to be a strategic approach. Organizations need to make sure they have their policies in place and they fully understand what it means to use AI in newsrooms. Beyond even the gender issue, there's the ethics issue of practicing journalism, right? There is the kind of processes of news gathering and what it means to rely on AI and to do that. So, for example, over the weekend, OpenAI did an update on ChatGPT that users then found that AI was being overly complimentary. So just to show you that even just a simple update changes the nature of ChatGPT, right? So we need to be really fully versed with these things, even just as a simple level of it being a tool, then at the level of our workers as media professionals, and also in terms of, okay, well, what does the decades and the centuries of gender inequality, what does the decades of using social media tell us about the kind of things we need to consider as we're entering the space of AI, So there's a lot of, I am very keen to support innovation. I use AI myself, but I've learned how to use it in a particular way, right? It doesn't do my job for me. It does, I use it as an assistant, and learning the difference between using it for what it's created for and using it to do your job as two different things, but then also understanding the consequences. There's a lot of innovative ideas coming out. And I think it's really important that women in media, African women, are not left behind in the production of AI tools and platforms, not just in the usage of it, but I want to see more African women as innovators who are using this AI to create really beautiful things. And so there's a lot of things within that. And so over the next few months, like I said, we're running a number of focus groups and researching what we just want to hear. We're not preempting anything. Just want to hear what has been your experience of using AI. What are your concerns? What are you excited about? What are the opportunities you wish existed? And that again will feed into part of our strategic plan over the next 5 years of initiatives we want to implement.
And I would imagine that your research will also focus on the potential of AI being used for misinformation and disinformation.
Yes, all of those things. Like I said, the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? So all of those things. And really, I think the important thing at this stage is to listen and to understand and to look back. You have the Beijing Declaration, which celebrated 30 years this year, right? And we're still pretty much talking about the same things as we were, in the 90s when it was first written. So I think this is a good time for us to make sure that we actually learn from the past, so that we can be more predictive about the future.
Yes. That was Dr. Yemisi Akinbobola, the CEO and co-founder of African Women in Media, speaking to us today. Thank you so much, Doc. All the best with your efforts.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for your brilliant questions also.
Thank you. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
And you too. Bye-bye.
This marks the end of today's edition of Africa Pivotal Moments. Once again, I would like to thank Dr. Yemisi Akinbobola for granting me her valuable time and critical perspectives on some of the current challenges and opportunities that face Africa. Thank you for listening and watching. Please remember to be kind at all times. Goodbye for now.